Hi everyone. So I believe, as always, we'll just give a couple of seconds to everybody to join. We could see that the number of attendees is growing pretty quickly, which is expected because as maybe as a first introduction, what is quite interesting is we all know that this topic is important. And at Ipsos, we're extremely pleased to see the number of attendees or persons who registered to this webinar. So that's probably, if ever we needed to have a proof, the best example that sustainability is a topic which is really important to all of us. So anyway, so it's 3 and 1 minute. So let's start. Thank you once again. So it's my pleasure to welcome you on Ipsos behalf. So I'm JP or Jean-Pierre. I'm the Chief Client Officer, which in other words means that I'm in charge of the relationship with our dear clients in Ipsos, Switzerland. With me today, I've got the chance to have two great speakers, Natalie, who is joining us from the US. She's a Chief Operating Officer belonging to the Ipsos Global Public Affairs service line. And Dilci, with me in Geneva, who is a Director working on the Innovation and Marketing and Strategy Understanding service line. So back to the usual agenda for those of you who are used to those webinars. This is a second session of something like 45 minutes. After 2 to 3 minutes of introduction, you will have Natalie taking us through what we know, or I should say a portion of what we know, because there's so much stuff that we can say that consumers are telling us or that we could have as an information. And by the way, we decided to have a bit less elements related to the Swiss dimensions because we have seen some findings that is quite similar across the globe and with Switzerland only. But we'll have at the very end a link to contact Martin Fenbeck, who can ever you want follow up with some specific elements on Swiss data. And then Dilci will really speak about what we can do, what you can do to act. And the way to illustrate it is simply how we are helping some of our clients to navigate the business question from the early stage of understanding up to some final screening stage. So without any further ado, let's start with 3 pages of introduction. So the next one, whenever needed, is just to say that this topic, when it comes to consumers, is seen as extremely important. So this is the outcome of a study that we're surveying since multiple years. Here we have just selected the latest 4 editions. These are related to the global trends. And as you can see, the percentage of consumers who agree to this statement is pretty massive, and the trend is strong. So the topic of sustainability, without any surprise, is massively important to consumers. Next. Also, and that's probably a key conclusion that we'll discuss at the end if you want. What is quite interesting is we have the impression that the topic has been somewhat hidden by obviously the COVID and health concerns, which are obviously related quite a lot to economic and financial considerations. But we really believe, and that will be the last chart to really set the scene and the next page, that this is something which is a massively strong and important trend. Because when again we interview consumers, and all the charts and all the pages that, by the way, you will see are quite often based on adults age 16 plus, and it's a national representative sample of the different countries. But definitely they consider that climate change, for instance, is an extremely serious element, and all those elements are growing. So long story short, consumers, citizens, customers are definitely waiting for us. This is something which is serious. We may have had the impression that it was a bit less important those past 2 years, but it's simply because the pandemic is potentially hiding or eluding it. It should not say that it's not there. So Natalie, if you don't mind.
Great. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Pleasure to be here with everyone today. So I'd like to just start by looking at what we call the sense of agency and how consumers and citizens view the responsibility for sustainability. And just as we walk through this presentation, one of the things you'll notice is, and we'll talk about this at the end, but the different elements of sustainability. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk about a sense of responsibility. In this case, we're looking at specifically climate change and protecting the environment. But as I said, a lot of these issues tend to come together under one umbrella in the minds of citizens. So in this case, we asked individually, who do you think is responsible for preventing climate change and protecting the environment in your country? We have the blue bar, which is government, the green bar, business and industry, and the red being personal responsibility. So a couple of things to note here. One, you see that government and business and industry are very similar in most countries in terms of perception of who's responsible. Where we see quite a bit of variance is in terms of the personal responsibility. But one of the really notable things is in some countries, business and industry is actually higher than government in terms of the expectation. And we've seen this consistently through the past years, this rise in the role of brands and industry to both take on issues, communicate about issues, and communicate about their position. So let's get into a bit more detail about what that means and some of the implications for business and industry, if we could, and what people expect from brands. So if we can go ahead a few slides. So we asked people on one of our surveys that types of things that brands and companies could do both during these times. So this was actually June in 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic, but also moving forward. And what's interesting is even in the midst, so June of last year, you see that offering products that do no harm to the environment and good benefits to employees still top the list. You see the safe shopping environment and products and services that meet needs as well as shareholder value. So a number of different things, but these two elements of what we'll call environmental, the social element with respect to employees and benefits, we'll consistently see those come up to the top in terms of expectations. So I just wanted to give a bit more depth on the next slide in terms of what people mean when they talk about climate and environment, because as I said, there's a lot of terms and potentially a lot of confusion around some of the terms. So here we looked at what does environment mean? And this is a study that was done very recently, just last month. And you can see globally, the number one is reducing waste and pollution and the use of plastics. So these two elements, and you'll see that packaging is an important part of this, are really what comes to mind in terms of what companies and brands need to address when we talk about those issues. So if we go to the next one, we're going to talk about how consumers view the sustainability and ethical practices for a few sectors. We did this for 4 sectors. We're going to show food and grocery and tech over the next couple slides. So we asked people, what are the 3 most important things that brands should do in the food and grocery space? And here again, we see that focus on biodegradable products and packaging, limiting waste, and using recycled materials. And in many ways, recycling, or that term recycling, is the cornerstone of what a lot of people ground their view of sustainability in. And you can also see some of the variations here. And this one I thought was really interesting. You see, particularly on the recycled materials, that this is not necessarily an issue that's solely owned by the younger generation. And I can share with you more of the age distributions, but they're very consistent to what you see there. So if we go to the more in-depth slide and look at all of the measures that were tested in terms of sustainability and ethical practices on the next slide, again, we looked at those 3 things where brands could act: biodegradable packaging and products, limiting food waste, and using recycled materials. But you also see that those are areas where people might expect brands could do better. So while there is an expectation that brands are doing better on those, that's also the areas that consumers want brands to focus on. But there's a lot of different things here. And what this says is that there's a lot of opportunity for brands to own a particular issue, not necessarily just the number one issue, but to be consistent and transparent about how they're acting against that issue. So for example, whether it be a governance question, supporting local businesses, where we start to see a bit more of the drop-off is what I would consider to be the more complicated issues that people have a harder time grasping. So organic products, water scarcity, and at the bottom, as you can see, speaking out on political issues. So if we go to the next one, we're going to look at the same set of slides, but for technology and personal electronics. And you can see here how the distribution is slightly different. Here, of course, recycled materials and packaging come up as the first ranked, But in fact, safe and healthy working conditions and paying workers fairly also make the top 3. So it is also not a universal expectation that consumers have. They will adjust by the nature of the company and the types of products and services they offer. And again, and we'll provide this deck after. You can look on the next slide, please, if we could, the full list and how both the perception of could brands do better and where are they doing well. And this is, again, specifically to technology and personal electronics. So we have to start to get a sense here of how consumers think about sustainability and their expectations for brands. Let's now look at what consumers are prepared to do, if we could move to the next section. So first of all, let's just take a look at their view in terms of what environmental issues around the world and how these have changed since 2018. So global warming and climate change, air pollution, and again, that issue of waste that's generated, as well as you can see, depletion of resources. And that perception of global warming and climate change being a priority has increased by 7 points over 2 years. This was done in February, March of last year. So that starts to give you a sense of, again, how consumers and citizens are thinking about these issues. And if we go to the next one, in terms of how they perceive their behavior. So we ask people, do you consider yourself to be a sustainable or ethical shopper? Are brands doing enough, and are you willing to pay more? Now, what's really interesting here, and Dilshi would talk about this as we go through, is you start to get a sense of the really important issue of segmentation and targeting among citizens and consumers. This is not necessarily an issue that will impact everyone, and we're going to see varying degrees of intensity and reaction to these messages. Roughly, across the multitude of surveys we do on this issue, we have about 1 in 2 who are engaged. And within that, probably, depending on the country and the nature of the audience, there's probably about half of that are really what I would consider to be active. And again, this is a general finding that we're finding across studies, and we'll start to see that here. So we have, as I said, and depending on the sector, about 50% plus who consider themselves to be sustainable or ethical shoppers, and slightly fewer who are willing to pay more. We're going to get into a little bit more on that pay more issue as we move forward. So if we can go to the next one, please. Looking at the variation, just again, starting to get a sense of how these issues do distribute across both markets and demography. You can see that there's wide variation by country on agreement with that statement on being a sustainable and ethical shopper. This was specifically in the clothing, apparel, and footwear category. I just presented this data actually at the Innovation Forum on sustainable fashion, but you can see here the variation between China and all the way down to Germany and South Korea, less than majority agreeing with that statement. Now, what's important here is this is not necessarily what people view is important, but really how they're acting. So we have a lot of data on, for example, the incidence of purchasing from secondhand stores, the willingness to pay, which we will get into as we proceed. If we go to the next one, one of the important issues is the issue of barriers. So what are some of the reasons why people might not be engaging in a way that we would want or expect them to? And so a key issue clearly is labels, and we ask people about labels, what comes to mind, or how do you describe products that might have labels such as fair trade, sustainable, or organic? And we had a number of items, but we've grouped them just for ease of analysis. And you can see of the items that we tested, the issue of a barrier actually is higher than the other measures. So either the perception that the products are too expensive, confusion perhaps about what the labels mean, or even accessibility of the products. There's about a third who qualify these labels in some ways a reluctance, so maybe they don't believe them, they don't find them credible. And then again, there's that third that comes up that really actively seek out or are willing to pay more for these products that have these labels. So if we go to the next one, let's just take a look at some of the challenges that we have on consumer opinion, because one of our most recent surveys, the Earth Day poll we just released, we conducted an analysis that we call perils of perception. And this is something that we've done over the years where we look at how people view an issue and what the reality is. So we have, as you can see here, across the board, most countries, majority saying that they understand what action they need to take to play their part in tackling climate change. And you can see the red is the disagree, which is less than 1 in 5 across all markets. So individuals feel that they understand what action they need to take. But if we go to the next slide, what you're going to see, in fact, is that their perception of what action they're willing to take, for example, less packaging at 52% globally and the Swiss number at 65. If we look at the actual fact of what impact that has on climate change and the environment, the true rank of that is actually 38 of all the different things that you can do. In fact, renovating housing for efficiency is the highest of these items that were tested, but ranks significantly lower in the minds of consumers. So while people do feel, or they'll state that they understand the issue, you can see that there is yet to be a lot of clarity in terms of what the reality is. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to address that reality as we go through, but at this point I'm going to hand over the mic, as it were, and walk through some of the more specific ways that we can address sustainability with brands. I think you're muted, actually, so.
Thanks, Natalie. Can you hear me well all? So in this part of the presentation, what we are going to do is that we are going to showcase you different examples of how we partnered with our clients in order to help them deal with their business questions related to sustainability. When it comes to those business questions, it's really, evolves around 4 different topics, I would say. First of all, the target, then the way we assess the different innovations, the price, and we've seen all along the presentation of Natalie that price was a key topic that we need to look into. And at the end, we are going also to open the thinking around the way to assess the propensity of people to change, so consumer change. First of all, let me show you an example of a segmentation that we have done for one of our clients on the home care category. And basically, this output is one of the key outputs that we had, because it clearly underlines the different segments of consumers related to that specific category and in that specific market. The first element that we see is that the key element, the key segment of consumer is really related around results and value, 33%. Then we have 26% that consider themselves as being less concerned about cleaning. So really the people who have less room to clean and so on, so less concerned about the topic in itself. 17% that are really more into the cleaning freaks, as we can call them, because they have clear routines around cleaning and so on. So these are overall 3 of the segments that are of less interest for us in our specific topic, but still good to know as a backup in your mind. Now let's focus on the 2 segments that really are of interest to us. So the segment around eco-natural, which is at 15%, and the segment around modern and eco-responsible in itself. We could see that first of all, sustainability doesn't resonate to all of those consumers, only for 2 segments. And even when it resonates for, a certain share of consumers, there is a nuance into the way people, adhere to whatever sustainability talks about. The ones who are really convinced are the ones here that we have called eco and natural, because those are the consumers who are more mature, who are more ready to switch to natural alternative, mild alternatives, and in a way to trade off efficiency towards more natural alternatives in their cleaning. The next share of consumers are the ones that stand for 10%, and they are really what we have called modern and eco-responsible, because those consumers have a comfortable lifestyle, they are educated, so they are fully aware of all that is at stakes when we talk about sustainability, but they are not ready to trade off, those routines. They are not ready to trade off efficiency for more natural or more mild options. So there is a need here to really address to those consumers with some proposition that combine, yes, a sustainable thinking behind, but along with efficiency, and also along with the fact that they need their germs to be killed, basically. So this output, how did we leverage it with our client? Basically, it helped our client to have a clear understanding of the different size of the consumers on the specific market. It helped also, to have a route of, okay, which are the territories in which the client can play. Is it the territory on the result? Is it the territory on the perfect cleaning side? Is it the territory related to naturality? Are they legitimate to play on that ground, or is it more the territory related to modernity? It was a foundational piece of work that really was a starting point for the client for all their thinking around sustainability on this specific category. And after that, the client informed us that they really entered in several workshops in order to fuel more their innovation pipeline based on this foundational piece of work. And this leads to my next section, that is really related to the way we assess innovation. Because once the innovation is here, once the idea, the concept is here, there is a way we need to assess it in order to really understand the potential behind. And in Ipsos, we have a clear philosophy when it comes to innovation assessment. Basically, what we do is that we place consumer into intuitive choices, so that the consumer really make choices between the product they currently use versus the product that we are going to test, that we are testing. By doing these intuitive choices, it clearly reveals the conviction of consumers towards the tested innovation, and conviction when it comes to sustainability is a key element to assess. This is exactly what we have done here on this example that I'm sharing on meat substitute that we've done for a global food company that came to us with a burger with a meat substitute patty inside at a premium price. Well, based on our recommendation, the client launched this burger, and it ends up being a success story because on a specific niche segment, but growing segment, it ends up being really a successful launch. Now, let me pause a second and look into the detail of the results that you have here in this table. As you could see, looking at the overall target, so on all primary grocery shoppers, we can see that the trial index, so basically what reflects the potential of the innovation, is average. Why is it average? It's average despite a strong differentiation perception, so despite a strong uniqueness, it's average essentially because of the relevance. It doesn't meet the need of all consumers, of all primary grocery shoppers, which go back to the point that Natalie was underlying, saying that sustainability topic doesn't resonate to all consumers indeed. Then placing the focus on meat substitute buyers, what we could see is that the relevance is improved. So yes, those people need this kind of product, this kind of innovation, and you could also see that uniqueness is improved as well. Okay, so leading to a better potential in terms of trial when it comes to this specific product. You wouldn't have missed that there is some red flags here that I am underlining right now on expensiveness. And I would like just to draw your attention on this element specifically. When it comes to the overall target of all primary grocery shoppers, yes, the premium price that we have placed for this concept isn't justified but because the relevance is lower, because it doesn't really fit to a need. But when we focus on the meat substitute buyers, this premium price, even if it's perceived as being expensive, because it's in red, is in a way compensated by the fact that the offer is super relevant to them, which leads to a better trial potential. Yes, it's niche, but at the end of the day, it meets a specific need and it has been successful. So this price topic leads me to the next section that is really a key topic here, because what we see with our clients is that, generally speaking, when we talk about a sustainable innovation, we really it's really linked to a premium price on top, because it requires, some additional work on your side, manufacturing or whatever. But from a consumer standpoint, it's not often the case that this added price, this premium price, is justified. So for consumers, it's more related to finding the right price rather than justifying the premium price. To illustrate this, we are sharing with you an example that we've done, so comparing two products, two concepts, one with without a claim on sustainability, and the other one with claims on sustainability. We've leveraged it through our Amazon website, and let me just share with you the way we did it, just for you to have an overall understanding. So we recreated the Amazon website to really place consumers as if it was in real life in the competitive context, and consumer could navigate, through the Amazon website as if it was in real life. And this piece of work lead to the following results that I'm going to share with you. So basically, when we compare both proposition, what we see is that, yes, the proposition with the sustainable claim managed to have higher 5 and 4 stars ratings. So the appreciation is enhanced, is better. Yes, the route with the sustainable claim is also, spontaneously generates more mentions around environmentally friendly, ocean plastic, recycling. So all this sustainability related realm emerge here with the route on that has the sustainable claims. But when it comes to purchase intent and linked to a price, we could see that there is a threshold that is reached. Okay, what we see here is that consumers are ready to pay up to $4.75 when it's for a product with a sustainable claim. But then if you increase the price to $5.25, then we see that purchase intent is dropping. So no matter the route, should it be with or without claim, there is a threshold at 4.75 that consumers are not ready to pass over. Okay, so this is something that we really need to consider when it comes to sustainable innovation, because price is key in this topic. And the last element that I wanted to share with you is, so not a business case, but more related to our working progress when it comes to sustainability innovation, and also the way we want to look at the assess the propensity of consumers to change their current routine and to shift their current behavior into a more sustainable one. So this is really experimental. This is work on progress, because you would have known that Ipsos is really, at the forefront when it comes to research and so on. And it's basically anchored on the MAPS framework that you are seeing here, which is a behavioral change framework that is encompassing so different dimensions. Motivation, do I want to do it? Do I want to switch to that sustainable innovation? Ability, am I able to do it? Processing, physical, does the context encourage me to change towards this innovation, this sustainable innovation? And social, what other people do and value compared to what I'm doing. Based on this MAPS framework, we have been able to develop two index. One that is called change index, that really the objective here is really to measure the readiness to change to the proposed solution from what consumers are currently doing. And then the second index is the intervention index, which is aimed at assessing the degree of intervention that is needed to facilitate the change. Okay, so change index, really readiness to change, and intervention index, really the degree of intervention that is needed to switch to that change, to smoothen to that change. By crossing both change index and intervention index, we are able to give you a roadmap on your prioritization, where you need to go, where you need to place your investment in order to have a proposition that for which consumers are ready to switch and on which you have low intervention required. And this is what is here illustrated in the very dark green side. Then you also have, the area of innovation that are more niche, okay, with a low likelihood from consumers to change, but still a low intervention required, meaning that there is possibility, to leverage this. And on the other side, you have the development space, meaning that these are the area where consumers are really keen to change. There is a high likelihood, but still there is also work to be done on our side in order to facilitate the change. So really, these are the latest, let's say, updates that we have when it comes to measuring the propensity to change from consumers. And it's an add-on in order to give you a new, a full vision, a full understanding of how you can better assess your sustainable innovations.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes to talk about how we can act and how brands can act on these, on what we've actually shared so far. So if we go to the next slide, just spend a few minutes on this. The first point is understanding where you are on what we call the sustainability wheel. So being able to proceed and act on sustainability means understanding whether you're at the exploration phase, or you're just looking to introduce a new product or service. Are you at the execution phase in terms of taking that to market, for example, or through the communication phase? So we have a site called the Sustainability Imperative that details in more depth each of these points and how you can really evaluate where you are so that you can make the most effective actions and steps. And related to that on the next slide is the sustainability focus. So as we've talked about, consumer attitudes and behavior is one element, but also the ability to execute on that area, the values that your business holds, as well as the impact that it has. So looking at each of these elements and not in some ways just the consumer attitudes and behaviors is really essential. And finally, on the third element of action is evaluation. So we believe very strongly, and we do this with many of our clients, is how to evaluate the impact of your sustainability actions. And this is on the next slide, please. So we can actually then take a very systematic process to understand whether or not the actions that a brand is taking on sustainability is having the impact that you wish it to have. And on that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jean-Pierre to wrap up and I think convey and communicate some of the questions.
Thank you. I hope that our dear clients are enjoying the session as much as I do. So thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you so much, Dilci. To the conclusion page, thank you. Three, let's say, final thoughts that we thought would be useful for you to take away. So some of those are quite obvious, most likely. But the first one, when it comes to saying that sustainability is here to stay, I believe we've seen lots of numbers demonstrating that this trend is there to stay, that it's rising. And even if potentially the pandemic has been hiding it for a short moment of time, this is definitely there to stay, and the trend can just increase. So the question is not if businesses should act, but it's much more when and how. And that's really something which is, if you want to be consumer-centric, that's where listening to them is vital, to have also some consideration for the long-term viability really of your businesses. When it comes to the journey, so once again, some of you may laugh because that's obviously where we do quite a lot of consumer experience journey with some of you. So Natalie quickly alluded to it, but when it comes to exploring, identifying, executing, monitoring, and communicating, it's absolutely fine to say that all the different companies are at different stages. And with some of our clients, we still continue to explore the landscape, to learn with them from consumers, to have early exploration tests and understand what parallel categories or competitors are doing. When it comes to identifying that we're definitely other categories and companies are still at, where the question is, what could you own? And what are the relevant assets that you could really activate for your brand and businesses? So that's again where we could help with you to act with co-creation workshops and other idea screeners. Executing is obviously everything related to going to the market and understanding how to make an initiative bigger. So Dilshi, for instance, mentioned the effect of price, and I will come back to it in a second. Monitoring and evaluating, a trend that we've seen since few months is definitely to have now either dedicated trackers to the topic, or to now plug new modules, or to have dedicated statement or items part of the tracking that we do for our clients, because obviously everything related to post-launch assessment and understanding the effect of what you do is quite critical. And the communication aspect is related to the pretty classic elements that you are used to perform with us, i.e. Pre and post testing, where without disclosing any secret, transparency is key in how you communicate what you are doing and the impact of your efforts, because we all know that whenever we try to cheat with this topic, that's going back much faster than anything. The second one on businesses can lead on the say-do gap. I believe we also demonstrated quite clearly, but by taking a stance or really going beyond the say-do gap elements, the say-do gap is something where we should really not hide ourselves behind it. We know that consumers may not say what they plan to do, or do what they say, or do what they would love to do, or whatever. We know as well that there are barriers that are quite difficult for them, us as citizens, to overcome, but that's definitely much more the companies to act. Because we came across the results of a study which was for me quite interesting on US and UK, for instance, where companies are more trusted than governments. So I will not open the floor to it, but it doesn't change the fact that we are expected to act, and businesses can do it. And sustainability is definitely a tricky topic for consumers because it's difficult for them to navigate. And by the way, there's another pool or other survey that you could have a look at the Ipsos.com website, which is so-called Perils of Perceptions, where we really demonstrate the fact that consumers may have behaviors which are not directly the ones which could definitely help us protecting and saving the planet. But the point doesn't change, which is disrupt before being disrupted, and Dilshi mentioned it as well. We've seen quite a lot of cases where, in full fairness, we try to recommend our clients not to try to take an uplift or a restage, or we will call it a rejuvenation of a brand using sustainable claims and increasing the price, because quite often consumers are just bringing us back to square one and telling us, guys, sorry, but we still expect you to deliver great quality. Sustainability is great as an additional benefit, but we can definitely expect this as part of the plan. And if we have another company coming and a new player disrupting it, then we'll just have our eyes to cry and to really see what is happening. And the last one, which is sustainability, is not a topic on itself anymore. That's more an observation I wanted to share, because having the chance to see quite a lot of the briefs which are coming to us, I was quite, let's say, surprised, and positively, I should say, to see that we are not receiving 2 to 3 months any single brief which are related to COVID only. And we've seen a lot of clients asking us what's happening, how could we understand, how we could get closer to them, etc., etc. And we have very few sustainability only briefs as well, since recently the briefs are much more something where it's all interrelated and where it's really saying that sustainability should be part of the equation, where it's really something which should be part of your strategy. And then we are back to, I would say, more classic maybe, but at least integrated business questions like how do I integrate sustainability into my innovation process? How do I integrate this one on top of the COVID into my omni-channel strategy? And we know that the consumer is buying more online, etc., etc. And how do I integrate this one into my communication strategy? So long story short, it's really to say it's there to last. Please don't stay at the level which consists in saying that consumers don't know what they should do, but we should act. And please, let's try to all together reconcile those elements, COVID and sustainability, into everything we do with you as big business questions. So hopefully those ones make sense. So the final page is more the Q&A. So we still have the 5 minutes which we're planning, which is great. So Martin was kind enough to share with me already 4 questions which were coming. So the first one is, so given the extremely low percentage who think companies could do better on speaking out about political issues, would this indicate companies are focusing on this, especially on social media, too much? Or should they instead be focusing on concrete measures that people feel have a higher impact on sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me start on that, Jean-Pierre, and then let others comment. Certainly, it is one of the changes we've seen over the past several years is that increasing expectation that brands will actually, let's say, have a position. There is a group that will expect brands to speak out, but I think the latter part of the question is the more relevant, that they should be speaking out on things that the brands themselves are actually doing, and not necessarily speaking out just for the sake of speaking out in terms of the public opinion. So what we see is people want to hear from brands about what actions they are taking, what actions they are either taking internally or externally with their products and services that align to their views. So I think in the context of that list, what was apparent is that in itself is not sufficient. It really is related to a brand speaking out or communicating on the actions that they're taking. So for example, a study that we presented in the US about diversity, people actually want brands to speak out about what they're doing and learn from brands. So I think the integration of the two is really important, but clearly the credibility and authenticity only comes if the brand is actually doing and taking the actions themselves. And the speaking out is the second part of that activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Dilshi, the next one might be for you. And by the way, if you want maybe to reactivate your camera, isn't it a problem that consumers are out of touch and do not know what they should do? How can we turn around this challenge?
Well, it's really depending on, I mean, it's not really a challenge as per se, because what we do is that generally speaking, we accompany our clients into really the first phase of the ideation with some internal workshop that they are doing in order to generate the ideas they want to offer to meet that sustainable, realm. And then what we do is that we push this into claim screening and to the full, learning plan and learning process they have related to sustainability, so that we meet consumers with sustainable offers that really to which they can resonate to which they can relate to. So it's not really a challenge as long as companies really integrate it into their thinking and have it, from the beginning to the start as a thinking and as a flow, I would say.
Yeah, can't agree more. I don't believe it's a problem. I see this more as an opportunity to co-create with consumers and after to break those things by consumer types and back to what have been said by segments. Maybe Natalie, the next one could be for you. That's a nice one. Isn't sustainability a much larger issue than wondering if consumers should eat less meat, recycle more, fly less?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. It's true that though. It's true that it's bigger than that, but sometimes people need something to represent their actions, right? So they need something that's indicative or essentially something they can hold on to that actually enacts their sustainability interests. So it certainly is much bigger than that. As I said, over the years, what we've seen is, in fact, it expand from what was a very limited view. You know, I recycle this bottle or this box into these other elements, and exactly that. I think now that there's a much bigger context around sustainability and the integration of it into day-to-day, basically day-to-day purchase in the consumer journey. And I was actually talking about this earlier, is, you know, it's all the way from the purchase decision to how I enact with that product, how it makes me feel, and then how I dispose of it. So there is actually a, you know, that circular element, either dispose or reuse, that's really making its way into much of the mindset of consumers.
Yeah. And to build on this quickly, again, referring to the surveys that we've done globally recently on periods of perceptions, there's a lot of actions that were questioned to consumers to say, do you do this and do you believe that they are having impact? And then we cross them against which actions do have an impact. And it's quite interesting to see that we hope we do good for the planet, and quite often we act on things which are quite useful. But anyway, others hopefully are more interesting than others. Another one, which I'm sorry for the person who has a question, I may not be able to answer, which is the home care study. Which market was it done for? Well, on purpose, we didn't show it. So sorry for this. And do you think the segment size are more or less relevant to other markets? Pardon me. We'll park this discussion, but maybe we could follow up by email. And if we want to take a last one, no, in fact, we are over. Otherwise, there was one on the CEO of Danone, but maybe we could park this one, which was what happened to this and some thoughts. So anyway, we don't want to extend further the time, but we agreed together. Thank you so much for this. My final comment is back to the introduction I made. So you could see here, Martin and us were all there and available to follow up with you whenever you would have questions. If you have specific deep dive requests when it comes to Switzerland, we do have lots of data related to it, and would be very happy to follow up on this one. So thank you so much. The next session and the next webinar that we will organize in Switzerland is likely to happen in June. We believe we have not locked yet the topic that it would be around early innovation, which might be directly related to it. Thank you so much all. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Dilshi, and have a lovely end of day. Take care.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.